Being a Jew in a Christian World. When I first saw this title, I thought Ze'ev Chafets couldn't possibly be speaking about life in a New York suburb. New York is the second Jewish capital. I thought maybe he would speak about the findings of interviews in small Jewish communities throughout the United States that he described in his book, Members of the Tribe. But he wrote that nearly 20 years ago in 1986, so I thought that probably wasn't the topic. Being a Jew in a Christian world. I grew up in a New York suburb. I don't think of myself as a Jew in a Christian world. I think of myself as a Jew in America, which happens to be increasingly religious, both Christian and Jew. And living in Manhattan for nearly 15 years, I don't even notice anymore that we're a minority. But Ze'ev has a different perspective. He grew up in Pontiac, Michigan, not far from here. And he spent most of his adult life in Israel, living there for 33 years and returning a few years ago to live in the United States. Through his eyes, after living in a Jewish state, he now is in a Christian world. And that Christian world is the New York area that I barely noticed wasn't Jewish, except around Christmas when it's most obvious. Ze'ev is a graduate of the University of Michigan, and he moved to Israel right after graduation. At age 29, he became director of the press office for the then newly elected Prime Minister Menachem Begin, whom he greatly admired. But he quit the Begin administration in protest after the massacres at Sabra and Shatila in Lebanon. Following this, he wrote many books and has since authored 9 books of fiction and nonfiction. He was the founding managing editor of the Jerusalem Report. He is a respected commentator and has written extensively on Arab-Israeli issues and about Israel's powerful Orthodox minority. He's married to journalist Lisa Beyer, who is also a guest today on our distinguished panel. He's a nationally syndicated columnist and a columnist with the New York Daily News, now that he lives in the Christian world. Please welcome Ze'ev Chafets.
Those of you who know New York know that there's no more Christian part of New York than the New York Daily News. So, take it out. Like this? Okay, I'll try it. Good morning to you. 9:20 in the morning on a Saturday. So I salute you for being here. I'm getting paid. I don't know what your excuse could possibly be. I know that there are some academics here, and I can just say that this is the first time in my life that I ever made a 9 o'clock class. But I also didn't make any at 10 or 11, so. How many of you, I see familiar faces. I was here 4 years ago. Were any of you here then? Do any of you by any chance remember what I said then? Not too many of you. Well, that's very good because I'm going to say completely different things this time. It's been a very confusing last 4 years for me. Let me just say some words about myself, starting with the topic, which is actually not about myself. I had slightly misunderstood the topic. I thought it was a Jew in a Gentile world rather than a Christian world. I guess that in some ways there isn't a great difference, but as you'll see later on as I talk, and then when you hear my wife Lisa, you'll see that Gentile plays a greater role in both of our calculations than Christian does. I should also preface what I'm going to say by telling you this, that Lisa and I have been married now for 9 years, and we've been together for 12 years. And although obviously we've talked about the topics that are going to be raised today between ourselves, we've never discussed this before in public. And I don't know what Lisa's going to say, and she doesn't know what I'm going to say. So this could devolved very quickly into something somewhere between the Oprah show and Jerry Springer. Because this topic is actually more fraught than I had imagined 12 years ago. As you heard, I was raised in Pontiac, Michigan. Most of you from around here, you know Pontiac, Michigan. Well, it's too late now because it's gone. But back then, Pontiac, Michigan was a nice little town, quite separate from Detroit because the freeways hadn't really been built yet, most of them, and it was its own kind of community. I was raised in a very reform congregation. We had an American flag and no Israeli flag, and it was a very classically reformed place. I remember back in 1963 or 64 when I was a teenager, and a young rebel rabbi named Sherwin Wine left Temple Beth El and announced that he was forming his own congregation because he didn't believe in God. And everybody at Temple Beth Jacob said, "Who believes in God?" But in any event, in 1967, I moved to Israel. I had the pleasure that I studied at the Hebrew University for a couple of years. Came back here for a year in between to Michigan. My first year at the Hebrew University, I had Professor Yehuda Bauer, who taught me a course. I don't remember what the course was, but I think it had something to do with the Holocaust. And what I do remember is that he wore a sweater, which was quite dramatic in those days. And we admired him because he was a kibbutznik. Still? So we no longer admired him. But we did at one time admire him. And I went to Israel. I soon got married to a girl from Mumford who came with me, Cheryl Klempner, if any of you know the family. She's still living in Jerusalem. We have a 32-year-old. She'll be 32. She'll be 32 tomorrow. And then Cheryl and I got divorced, and I married a second time an Israeli girl, and we had a son, Shmulik, who's right now in the army, and then that one didn't work out too well either. And I mean, I'm telling you this, this isn't going in the record, right? I don't want to see this in the transcript of the meeting. And then, we split up, and I was living happily in Tel Aviv, and I was at that time editing a magazine called the Jerusalem Report, which we had just founded, Hirsch Goodman and I, and Ehud Yari and Natan Sharansky and a couple of other people. And the word spread that there was a new Time magazine bureau chief in Jerusalem, and that she was only 29 years old, and she was good looking. Well, being a feminist, I obviously didn't care what she looked like. But I did happen to run into her at a party that we had, and we got sort of engaged within a week or so, and we've been together ever since. And when I met her, I learned the following facts about her. I mean, I learned many facts about her, but some of the new facts were that she is comes from Louisiana, from Lafayette, Louisiana. You won't have to introduce her now. And she is not Jewish. And to me, this was, it was no big deal. I mean, living in Israel, I didn't care very much who was Jewish. In fact, I didn't care at all. And it's a thought that, had seldom crossed my mind, and it certainly didn't bother me. And also, she looks Jewish, so. Afterwards people would say, you made a shiksa, huh? A blonde goddess, I think. She looks just like all my other wives. Better looking. And we talked at the beginning, about Israel and where we would live, and I asked Lisa if she would be interested in. We talked about she wanted to come back to the States. She didn't want to live in Israel permanently, and I said to her, okay, when Shmulik finishes high school and goes in the army, we'll move back to America, and you'll have your turn. Now, Shmulik at that time was 9 years old. So I figured 9 years, the baron will die or the dog will die. Something will happen. And we'll probably be here after that. But sure enough, and Lisa got extensions from Time Magazine, which was a sort of an unparalleled thing for them to let any bureau chief be in Jerusalem for 9 years. It's usually 3 years. And she stayed on until Shmulik went in the army. And then we moved to Pelham, New York, 1 month before the beginning of the Intifada. In August 2000, we had a couple of very nice goodbye parties, and we had people, Arabs came, some friends, colleagues of Lisa's, and so on. It was a very idyllic period, and I was quite happy with my son going into the army because, after all, it was peace, and there was going to be a Palestinian state and an Israeli state, and everybody would live happily ever after. And so we got here beginning of August, and the Intifada began the beginning of September, which was a bit of a trauma, and I want to talk about that in a moment. Coming back to America, obviously I wasn't a virgin on the subject of Gentiles, Christianity, and life in a Jewish life in this country. First of all, I was born and raised in an environment where almost everybody I knew was Christian, or at least not Jewish. So it wasn't a novelty to me by any means. And then, as Myra said, I had written a book about traveling through America in small Jewish communities and so on, all around. And so I spent a year on that topic, and I knew something about it from there. But I did, it was the first time that I personally, as an adult, had ever been exposed to living for any length of time in America. It was quite a jolt to me. It was, I could say, the victory of feminism over Zionism, in that sense. That I found myself in a place that I hadn't expected to be, and am glad to be because I get to be here with Lisa, which is the point of the exercise. But I should say that one of the things that I've learned about the subject is that Christianity, Christians, Gentiles, and so on don't come all in one size. And I had some interesting intimations about what life would be like with Lisa from my visits with her family. Can I talk about this? Carefully. There are enough reasons why, let's say that you're the mother of a 30-year-old woman, that you wouldn't be delighted to see me turn up anyway. With 2 kids and from 2 different wives, and I'm living 6,000 miles away, and I'm, 15 years older than Lisa, so, I'm not the ideal, probably, candidate anyway. And the Woody Allen factor was added to that, you know. But Lisa's mom, and Lafayette is a town, it's a Cajun town. There are very, very few Jews. In fact, I think there's only one, and his name is Dr. Ostrich. And they used to always ask me if I knew Dr. Ostrich, and then in the barbershop, and then one time they told me that Dr. Ostrich had died. So I don't know if there are any more Jews down there now. But Lisa's mom, it turns out, is a woman that you would, all of you, appreciate because she is an atheist, and which is not an easy thing to be in Cajun southern Louisiana. Her father, on the other hand, they're divorced, is a born-again Pentecostal Christian. And when I went to meet him, he said to me, it's my belief that the Jews are God's chosen people. And I said to him, in that case, I have good news for you about your grandchildren. And I have always found, him to be sincere in his, in my view, mistaken belief that the Jews are God's chosen people. I once had a friend here in Detroit who told me also told me the Jews are the chosen people, and I said, well, do you really think? I mean, knowing me and my family, do you really think that we're chosen? And she said, baby, I didn't say God made the right choice. So there was that, and Lisa herself, I think it's fair to say, I'll let her speak for herself, but I think it's fair to say that she is also came to our relationship not as a religious Christian, and so the issue of Christianity versus Judaism didn't actually come up. The issue of Americanism versus Israelism certainly came up, and the atavistic desire that I had to raise my children as Jews, which I don't even know if I was surprised by it, but it was a very strong feeling that I had, and Lisa agreed reluctantly that we would raise our children as Jews, providing I did the raising, which makes sense in that particular sphere, not in other spheres. And so that's how we came to America. I should only tell you to flesh out the picture of our family, that we have a couple that's lived with us since our son was born. In other words, a nanny, and later her husband joined us, and now they have 2 kids. And they are very religious Catholics from Goa in India. And as I say, they live with us, and the nanny, the woman, Felsi, is an extremely mordant sense of humor and disapproves of me in general. And she had never actually heard about Jews at all until she came to Israel. And in the early days of our relationship there, she saw some rabbis, what she calls anybody with a hat a rabbi, on the street burning bread. This was before Pesach, obviously. And she came back and she said, they're burning bread, Ze'ev. And I said, yeah. And she said, why you don't burn bread? So I said, look, fellas, it's like this. You know, there are all kinds of Jews. There are Orthodox Jews and secular Jews, and I'm a secular Jew. And she said, no, Ze'ev, you are a bad Jew. So this is the sort of the state of play in our household. When my son Kobe was born, I had him circumcised by a conservative rabbi, and he also said a few prayers in addition, which means that he's officially converted, at least as far as conservative Judaism is concerned. When my daughter Annie was born, we didn't have a circumcision. They only do that in Eritrea, I think. Um, but we did have a party for her, and I've considered her, we've all considered her to be Jewish as well. When we decided to move to the States, we picked Pelham. Pelham is a town. Do any of you know Pelham? It's right up by the Bronx. It's in Westchester. It's a town which is roughly divided between there are about 2,000 journalists there who live there. You know, virtually the whole staff of the New Yorker, the New York Times, it's unbelievable. All these hundreds and hundreds of journalists live in Pelham. And the other half of the town is essentially the Genovese crime family. Don't put that on the tape. It's a town with a rich history, a rich urban history. And I knew a lot of these guys who were in Pelham, and they all said to me, "Oh, you know, it's great. They got a shul in Pelham, a little community shul, and it's fantastic. And you know, it's very liberal, and we're all friends here. We're all a community, and we love each other." And you know, these are guys who are telling me this without naming names, who are recognizable names to you among America's most proclaimed and admired liberals, Jewish liberals who are Jewish. And so I called the place, the synagogue, and I talked to a rabbi there who told me, you know, chad mashmei, just straightforwardly, that we weren't welcome there because we're a mixed marriage. And Lisa had no interest in converting and still does not. And I had no interest in her converting at that point. And I didn't even want to tell them that Kobe, for example, was officially, from their point of view, Jewish, because I didn't, you know, because they pissed me off, because I didn't want to tell them, that's why. So so we came to Pelham in a bit of a scandal in the little shtetl there, because, you know, clearly, I mean, it's hard to make the case that my children aren't Jewish enough for somebody's synagogue. But that was the case, and it was just a racial issue. They were mixed. They had the wrong kind of blood. I mean, it was, as far as I'm concerned, it's exactly as liberal and exactly as pleasant as, you know, South Africa. But anyway, I didn't want to make a big deal of it, and especially because I felt foolish, because in Israel, I hadn't been in a synagogue for 33 years. Unless by accident. I mean, I might have been there for a wedding or something, but you know, I was completely not just a-religious, but anti-religious and counter-religious and, you know, counter-revolutionary and all this stuff. I mean, the notion of me trying to get into a synagogue was ridiculous, you know. So I didn't want to pursue it. So, but then I figured I got to get these kids some you know, stuff here, because they gotta know who they are. So we joined a Reform temple in Mount Vernon. Anybody know the temple in Mount Vernon? Sinai Free Synagogue, which Lisa and I went to first, and she checked it out to make sure that it would be okay from her point of view, because there are a lot of sensitivities which I think she'll address. And so we joined this place, and then, you know, like, to my astonishment, a couple of weeks later, I get a call. They wanted money. Honest to God, they wanted money. I said, you know, and I said, usually people have to pay me to go to, you know, I'm not gonna. I have to pay you to go to the synagogue for what? And anyway, I'm not going to go. It's just for the kids. It's like being a farmer, you know. They pay you not to grow crops, but they were pretty adamant about it. So I enrolled these kids in Sunday school, and this was a horrible moment for me, because I took them to services on Rosh Hashanah, the first year, and you know, like I said, I grew up in Temple Beth Jacob, and this place is a replica of Temple Beth Jacob. Once I had written years ago, this is an aside, but it dawned on me once in a meeting. We're sitting in a meeting of Likud guys back in the 70s. And there was Yitzhak Shamir, who had been the head of the Lehi underground, and there was Begin, of course, and there was all these other types, Eitan Livni and other people. and they were talking about something that had to do with the building, the Mitsudat Ze'ev, the actual party headquarters. Had to do with the boiler or the elevator or something. And it occurred to me that here these guys are, these Polish Jews, these little Polish Jews who woke up one morning and they Hebraicized their names and they moved to Palestine and they picked up arms and they rechristened themselves, renamed themselves as Jewish revolutionaries and historical figures, and they fought the British and they fought the Arabs and they fought the Mapai and they did all this stuff, and then here they are 60 years later, it's a bunch of old Jews sitting around talking about the furnace. You know, it doesn't and you can't, it was like you can't outrun fate, you know? You are what you eat. You are what you are who you are. And all of a sudden here I am, you know, and living in Pelham, New York at this service that reminds me of the one at Temple Beth Jacob, and they're singing all these little songs, you know, these temple songs that I used to make me cringe when I was a little kid, and now I'm singing them with my kids, and I was thinking, I know. So, and they liked it. They like it. That's the thing. And then I had to get a, you know, and I have to teach them Hebrew. Because Lisa, although Lisa knows some Hebrew, and we sometimes speak in Hebrew, so the kids won't understand, but the kids lost their Hebrew when they came to America. So I looked for a Hebrew teacher. So I called the Reform Temple. They don't know anybody who speaks Hebrew there. They sent me a girl from Cholon who made 5 mistakes in the first 2 sentences of the interview, and I didn't want her because, you know, I just didn't. So I put an ad in the paper, and who comes up? Who pitches up? This rabbinical student from Yeshiva University with the black yarmulke, a very charming kid. He's from Columbus, Ohio, lovely boy. And I told him, teach my kids Hebrew, but don't teach them any Judaism. Just teach them Hebrew. Just teach them reading and writing and like that. And he said, okay. And we winnowed the texts to keep all the religious stuff out of it. But still, they look up to him. He's a rabbi, you know. So they're very chuffed by him, and then the next thing I know, I built a sukkah this year. All right. No. Lisa would like for you to think that she built the sukkah because she thinks that Jewish guys can't build things. Which is true. But the truth is that I ordered that sukkah from sukkah.com. I did. It came from China. It's made in China by and it was put up by our nanny. So here I am. I'm living in Pelham, New York. I got an Orthodox Malamed who comes to teach my kids twice a week. I got a sukkah, and I got my old Temple Beth Jacob songs back ringing in my ears. And the kids say to me, Abba, you are the rabbi of the family. I'm the rabbi of the family. So the other day, every shtut that you say, every dumb thing that you say, they listen to. They're 6 and 8. So Annie says to me the other day, she says to me, we're playing a game. Abba, can I bow in this game? They're meeting the queen or something like that. I said, of course, why not? She said, Jews don't bow. I said, they don't bow? What do you mean? And she said, Jews don't bow. You said that. And I thought I did. You know, we don't? But yeah, we were talking about some story or something in which the Jew didn't want to bow to an idol or something like that. So Jews don't bow. So now she doesn't want to bow. So I'm the rabbi for this stuff. And on Yom Kippur, Kobe said to me, Kobe's my 8-year-old, he said, what do you do on Yom Kippur? And I said, Jews don't eat. They fast and pray. And he said, well, you don't fast? And I said, no. He said, you don't pray? I said, no. But you're a Jew. And then I was thinking what Felsi would say. You're a bad Jew. How am I doing on time? Am I doing okay? Speed it up a little bit? No? So anyway, that's the state of play at the moment. I'm hoping we're starting this summer to take the kids back to Israel, at least in the summers, and we will increase their Hebrew. Kobe's already starting to talk a little bit in Hebrew. My first two children I raised in Hebrew, so it's a departure for me to be talking in English to my children. And we'll see. I don't know how, I was so certain about how my first two were going to come out, and this never bothered me really, or I never exercised myself about it. And now I have to be the parent who is responsible for the Jewish education of these children, and that's a new thing. Somebody said that Pelham isn't typical America, and that's right. New York is different. I figured that out very early on in Pelham. We had a contractor who came over to the house, subcontractor, to do some cleaning. His name was Rumiel something. Anyway, he was a black guy. And he walked into the house, and I have a big poster in the living room of an Israeli poster. And he very nonchalantly read the Hebrew. And I said to him, are you a black Jew? And he said, no, but I am a mashgiach. I said, you're a mashgiach? That's a kosher inspector. I said, how could you be a mashgiach? He said, I worked in the kitchen at the Bronx Home for the Hebrew Aged. And I became an expert in ashgacha, but especially for Pesach. He says, so I travel. He said, I make money by traveling around the country, giving advice, being an advisor to communities on how to do ashgacha properly on Pesach. So I said, that's not Pontiac, Michigan. That's different than Pontiac, Michigan. And the little traffic guard lady right in front of our house, who was right off in the dictionary under Italian, American, New York, New Rochelle, 65-year-old chain-smoking crossing guard. When the sukkah went up, she said to me, she recited the entire poem of Oifim Pipachuk in Yiddish, and then she said she learned it from her neighbors, and then she told me that she had taken her neighbor's dog. She has Jewish neighbors. She took her neighbor's dog to church on St. Francis of Assisi Day, which I guess they bless animals, and she told the priest that the dog's name was Fido Horowitz. Okay, I want to just say a couple of serious things, since I know that this is a serious colloquium, and so I do want to say a couple of serious things in sort of wrapping up my part of this. I had two really dislocating experiences. I mean, aside from the fact of not being at home anymore and being homesick all the time, the first year I was here, had made a ritual out of turning on the radio, getting Israeli radio on the computer and just listening to the radio and pretending I was in Israel mostly. And I went back and forth also a couple of times for business, for writing purposes in the first year. I think twice or three times, I don't remember. But suddenly my son was no longer in this nice peacetime army. He was in a wartime army. And he was, in a fit of patriotism and machismo, he joined an extremely good or bad, depending if you're the father or the commander, unit, special ops unit. And so I spent the next 3 years, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to check the internet to make sure things were okay. And in the course of this, I came to an odd realization. I had a meeting at the paper, at the Daily News, with a couple of editors who were Jews, guys about my age. And one of them said to me, I couldn't do this. I couldn't allow my son to go to the army, certainly not to a war. I just wouldn't be able to do it. I wouldn't be able to stand it personally. And that was one of the times that I felt most like a Jew among Gentiles, despite the fact that these guys were both Jewish. And I've noticed that in America, at least on this subject, I very often find myself more comfortable with Gentiles than I do with Jews. Partially that's because I find either Jews in America on this subject tend, to my taste, to be either too hot or too cold. And I found, although when I was in Israel, I was a supporter of the Oslo peace process, and I'm generally not especially unreasonable for a right-wing extremist. I found that here I was very unable. I didn't even mind political arguments. I was unable to deal with either the apathy or the emotional distance or the inability to understand what I felt. And when I met people in various situations, Americans, non-Jews, who had kids in the army, who themselves had been in the army, I felt in some ways, a greater emotional connection than I do with people, even old friends of mine, who have no idea what this experience is like. And I became very, again, in Israel, most of our friends were lefties, and part of the time I was myself, and part of the time I wasn't, but it was a very familiar thing. Here I found that I didn't want to argue. I just didn't want to argue about it. And so I stopped arguing about it, basically. About the Intifada, about the morality of it. I said, I lied. Everything on me. Whatever my son does, I do. If he's a fascist, I'm a fascist. If Israel's an imperialist country, I'm an imperialist supporter of that country. That was my point. It's a point of view I never had there, but here I had it because I couldn't emotionally locate a different point of view. And then I had a change on 9/11. 9/11 was a watershed for a lot of people. It was a great watershed for me on this topic because for a couple of things. First of all, most people were shocked by 9/11. I wasn't shocked. Most people wanted to know why they hate us. I knew exactly who hated us and why they hated us, and I also had a good sense of who us was. I never had any doubt that the reason that New York was attacked is because in the mind of al-Qaeda-like Arabs, New York is a Jewish place and a Zionist bastion of the Zionist control of the world and so on. I think that there are probably other reasons, and Washington was attacked too. But I took that as a statement as a Jew, as well as someone living in the New York area. And from that beginning and until now, it's been very clear to me that whatever else the terrorist impulses in the Middle East are, they're anti-Jewish. When Danny Pearl had his throat cut and they made him say, my mother is a Jew and my father is a Jew and I'm a Jew, and then they cut his throat and gutted him, some people said, well, maybe it's about that, maybe it's about him being Jewish and maybe it isn't. But to me, there was no question about it. And when, just last week, the Prime Minister of Malaysia gets up and says, the Jews control the world, and 57 heads of Islamic countries applaud him, I have no doubt that this has to do with me as a Jew, not me only as an Israeli or me as a resident of America. It has to do existentially with me as a Jew. We're in a climate, in my opinion, which I wouldn't have said even 10 years ago, where it's really a war on Jews. Not only on Jews, but on Jews. And I think that that's very unmistakable in all of the rhetoric from Bin Laden to Hamas to the Iranians. I don't think I don't think it comes from Wahhabism. I don't think it comes from Shiism. I don't think it comes from Palestinian nationalism. I don't think it, unlike Paul Krugman, I don't think it's because of Arik Sharon. Unlike the Democratic candidates for president, I don't think it's because of George Bush. I think it's because there is a spirit in the air. Somebody said, one of my friends said to me not too long ago, it's 1938. It's 1938. I'm sorry. And that brings me to the end of what I wanted to say, because after the 9/11 attack, there were a lot of people in our town who were killed in that attack. People who worked downtown, stockbroker type people, including one or two who had children in our kids' school. And Pelham is a very gentrified place, upscale. I mean, not that far upscale. Journalists can afford to live there, but and very polite and so forth. And they had an ecumenical rally or prayer vigil on Saturday at the high school field, which we went to. They had Catholic priests, and they had a rabbi, and they had a couple of Protestant ministers there. And everybody was a little bit confused. They didn't quite know how to do this. They prayed a little bit. The high school band played some terrible selection from Mendelssohn. The mayor made a little talk. And, it struck me that Pelham is a very competent city, usually. They can do everything. It's like living in Singapore. But they didn't know how to do this. They didn't know how to do this kind of a memorial. Every little town in Israel where you can't get, you can't, the stoplights don't work, can whip out a memorial to victims of terror in 20 minutes. Every deputy mayor knows how to do that. In Pelham, they didn't know how to do it. They were confused. And at the end of the rally, one guy, I think he was a high school kid, yelled, "Go America!" And there was this deep, embarrassed silence. And I felt very, very estranged at that moment. I felt like I was in a place that didn't get it. I felt like I was in a place that wasn't going to get it, that the people were too nice, and that and it was a scary moment. I must say that the last 2 years, and I know that this is going to upset many of you, because I'm sure that many of you are fervent opponents of the Bush foreign policy. I must say that the last 2 years for me have been a great relief in the way America has reacted. I think that America, and I'm not talking now about one administration or one party or the other, thing in general, America understands, gets it. And I must say that for the first time in my life, the contraction, or if it is a contraction, or the construct, Judeo-Christian, has started to sound to me like something better than simply a cliche. That I think that that as a Jew, I have a feeling that for reasons which are complex and which have less to do perhaps with us than they do with the way the world perceives us and the way the world is suffering from its own limitations and frustrations, there is a growing tendency to conflate Zionists with Americans and Jews with Christians and Crusaders with Zionists and so on and so forth. And it feels to me a little bit like we're all in this together. And that certainly, if you had asked me 3 years ago when we moved to the United States, would I feel a certain sense of relief with knowing that Israel has been embraced as a member of the Judeo-Christian society by the United States or American society? I wouldn't have thought so. But things happened in 3 years. I moved from Israel to America, I hope temporarily. The war against the United States and against the Jews and against the Jews of the United States and all of us together has, which had been bubbling for quite some time, is now quite open and on the table. And that's, to me, where these two issues come together. And as a Jew, not an American Jew, not even as an Israeli Jew, as a Jew, I'm quite proud of the United States, and I'm quite comfortable, I must say, with the notion that this country is not going to, I mean, the offer on the table, and here I really will stop because I'm going on too long, but the offer on the table now is for the Bush administration to rethink its foreign policy in the Middle East. The problem isn't America. The problem is American policy in the Middle East. Which American policy? Well, the policy of supporting Israel. And the offer is now on the table that if America stops supporting Israel, that it will find it very easy to make friends in the Arab Middle East. And I'm quite confident, and I'm happy to be quite confident, that that's not a devil's bargain that I think this society is prepared, this Christian society, or this Gentile society, or this secular society, or this Judeo-Christian society is prepared to accept. So let me leave you laughing. I was kidding. I didn't mean to end on quite such a sobering note. But my wife will, well, I guess we're going to have a discussion now, and I'll be glad to answer any questions or participate in any discussion. Thank you for being such an attentive and nice audience. And I'll let you hear Lisa next, which is the better part of the show.